Toss that rusty old grill into the lake and set the Barker Lounger on fire. You have now entered the Dadward Spiral. My name is Barack Obama. Oh, that's a joke from a previous podcast. My name is Aaron Pruner.
And my name is Eddie Doty.
And you can find me on Twitter at Aaron Flux and Instagram at Aaron W. Pruner and Facebook at that same name. I don't know why I changed it from Aaron Flux. Maybe Aaron W. Pruner sounds more official. Eddie, you're just, where are you?
I don't know.
Can you tell I've already been drinking?
It's all good. No, you can find me at Twitter at Kirby.Matrix. You can find me at Twitch at twitch.tv/0dork30. But Twitter is mostly where I reside in terms of
you could find
commenting.
Me up in the club with a bottle of bub, right? How white did I just sound?
Pretty white, dude. Not gonna lie.
You can also find this show if you want to follow us on Twitter. I'm Dadward Spiral. I have not created an Instagram yet. There is a Facebook for the show as well. I'm trying. I have a kid here. Give me a break. It's the pandemic. Shout out to Dragon Wagon Radio for keeping us alive, because I don't eat food. It's just Dragon Wagon Radio supplying my life force. Eddie.
Yes, sir.
How are you?
That was maybe our best intro. I just want to get that on
Look,
record.
Man, I want to point something out. I'm still technically a journalist, and today I got this press kit in the mail from the History Channel for a new I guess documentary about DB Cooper, and in the thing was a really cool backpack. Inside the backpack was a blanket, new Ray-Ban Wayfarer sunglasses, a bag full of gold chocolate coins, and a bottle of Maker's Mark. And so I'm drinking.
Sure. If you get free booze from as part of a swag kit, I feel like you're legally obligated to.
That's all my booze. I swear to God, since the pandemic started, all the different studios are just sending alcohol. They're like, fuck it. We get it.
I get it. My son he's literally in the next room working on a project for school that he's had 4 days to do. So of course, over half of it is getting done tonight. So he's kind of just doing exactly what I did when I was his age, which is tell my parents that I've been doing some of it every night. And then when my parents finally check, realize I haven't done nearly as much as I said. So now he gets to finish that in the other room. So after when we're done with this, I get to go in and check his little 4-paragraph essay and make sure he's not going to get I know. Here's the thing: we know the grift. We know that in fourth grade, if he's a half day late on turning in this assignment, it's not going on any permanent record. We understand that, but we also have to instill a sense of discipline and commitment and consequences to actions. And so therefore we have to that's what I'm currently struggling with is how hard do I drop the hammer on him tonight and basically be like, you're sitting in that chair until the shit gets done.
Oh God, dude. I was a nerd.
I was a nerd, but I had ADHD, and so does my kid. And
okay,
so it's so and then again, how much of it is I get it. It's going to be okay. Don't freak out. Don't beat yourself up, because he will. So if I don't have to worry about other kids beating up my kid, I have to worry about my kid beating himself up, because he's more than capable of that. He actually stands up for himself pretty well, and he's trained a little bit. He does capoeira. It's not like he's going to be taking dudes out in the street or anything. But he's confident enough to handle himself in a schoolyard situation, which doesn't really apply. But I do have to worry about him being too hard on himself when he doesn't meet his own expectations.
Yeah. No, I get it. Well, I'll do my best to not talk your ear off for 3 hours. That hasn't happened yet. Who knows what's going to happen in this episode? And speaking of this episode, we have another guest, and he's just waiting, sitting there with his Emmys in the background, staring at us in this kind of ominous looking shadow. I first met our guest, Rory Karpf. Is it Karp or Karpf? There's an F after the P.
It rhymes with barf.
Oh,
got it.
All right, that's good to know. Rory Karpf. The first time I met Rory, I was one of my first times going to the Television Critics Association press tour, and my boss was like, "Can you go interview Ric Flair?" And I was like, "Are you fucking serious?" because I was really big into WWE growing up, and Ric Flair scared me. Like, he was one of those personalities on TV I was frightened of. And so I was immediately nervous because I didn't know what to expect. And he was just the nicest guy. And Rory was the director of his 30 for 30 on ESPN. And I didn't know what a 30 for 30 documentary was. I don't watch ESPN. I'm not a sports guy, but this brought me in. And I have since been a bit intrigued to watch other sports documentaries because of this. So first off, thanks, man, that you did really good work there. And I looked you up on IMDb, and you got some other titles here. There's the Book of Manning. There's the Coach Snoop docuseries with Snoop Dogg, and most recently a project called UFC Fight Island Declassified. And I guess we'll get into all of that. Rory Karpf. Can I just say Rory Bart? No, I'm not going to do that. Welcome to the show, Rory.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm going to just keep rambling, so just beware.
It's quite all right.
Thanks for coming. And what I find funny is Eddie and I decided to do this. I confronted him and I said, "Would you like to do the show with me?"
You confronted me.
I did. Like, he came out of the bathroom in his apartment, and I was just there. And it turns out we know way too many of the same people from like different circles in our lives. And when he mentioned you, I was like, "Are you kidding? I know him." And that's sort of why I was like, we have to get him on the show. And you're the first person we've gotten who sort of delves into this realm that I am uncomfortable with, because it's everything I that's foreign to me, aside from the world of sports. The even Eddie has briefly talked about it previously on the show, the world of martial arts training or fight training, and I want to talk about that. And I want to talk about how, bullying, and how we as parents should be dealing with bullying when that comes up, and the idea of masculinity in 2020. But before we get to any of that, Rory, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me. First I want to state that there is a difference between making shows for the UFC and fighting in the UFC.
There is. Thanks for pointing that out.
And usually the guys that make the shows behind the scenes are the nerds that were getting beaten up in school. So don't, you were saying before we started that you weren't athletic growing up, and I wasn't either. I was routinely picked last in school, and just for sports, and just tonight at dinner, my oldest son, who's 14 and a half, is really excited because he just made it to 5'3", and I'm pretty short myself. I'm currently 5'6". Short guys know how tall they are to the actual inch. So, but yeah, I was not an athlete growing up by any stretch of the imagination. But I think, Aaron, you've stated you're not athletic or in the sports or in the fighting. But I think Eddie would agree, within all of us, within every single person alive, I think there is a fight. And I think it's just a matter of channeling that. And, I was not athletic growing up, but I started, I went out for the football team my senior year in high school. And I remember the coach telling me that he didn't even know if I was good enough to play on the scout team, which is like basically all you have to do is just get your ass kicked. And, but I showed up, I tried, and I was okay with making myself uncomfortable. And I think that's a big part of it. If you're not an athletic guy, are you willing to get a little uncomfortable? And, maybe with you, maybe you're more comfortable writing, that's where you feel, or doing a podcast, or do it, whatever it is. But, I think if you, this is true in any endeavor, if you're willing to make yourself uncomfortable, that's how you grow as a person. So yeah. I try to will myself into an athlete.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about this and about my childhood and about certain things I learned or certain things I went through. I've been thinking a lot about bullying over the past year, and I watched that movie, The Social Dilemma, and I'm thinking about how I'm going to handle stuff like that when my daughter is that age, and like what social media is going to be like then. But I think back to, so you've listened to the show, you've heard me talk about the trauma that happened in my family. And growing up, I grew up under this sort of air of clinginess, that my mom was extremely protective of me because of the loss that she experienced. And in the process of that, I had no male role models. Like, I didn't know how to ride a bicycle until I was 8 years old, and I had to teach myself. And I got bullied a lot, especially at home. We lived in technically a condo, but it's like a glorified apartment building. And my neighbor, I'm not going to mention names because I don't know if they listen to the show. Well, if they are, they're going to be pissed off, whatever. Their dad beat up their mom all the time. And they were both beat up by their parents, and in turn took that out on me on a regular basis. And when you talk about there's a fighter in everyone, I took years of that sort of abuse, to the point where I was afraid to go outside to play. My toys were broken, stolen. At one point, the older kid who ended up going to prison broke into the house and assaulted me. And I think I was like 12 or 13 at the time. And their parents were pretty much of the mindset of their kids, they'll sort it out, without actually giving the messaging that, hey, breaking into someone else's house and punching them in the face is not a good thing. But it got to a point where I did snap, and I fought back, and I never got fucked with again. And in turn, I remember hearing
that. Remember, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting your emotional. Was it like a Christmas story? I always picture
dude,
that.
I remember what happened. It was a lot of punches to the face and knees to the groin. Like, I snapped on this kid, and he went inside crying. And then his dad, who was a probation officer, beat the shit out of him for letting a pussy like me fight him. And I heard him say that out loud because he was screaming at him and beating him up. But I never got fucked with again. And there was something about that moment where I was like, oh, like, it was the first time I ever stood up for myself. And there's something empowering about that, but also kind of scared me, because growing up, I was there was this message constantly put in my head of, you want to avoid confrontation because you don't want to be like your father. Even though I never met my dad, it was this like lorded over big warning of, you can't be like your dad. Your dad was violent. Your dad was a drug addict. Your dad was an alcoholic, all this stuff, which was when you're constantly being told that, and then you're afraid of confrontation, that leads to antisocial, depressed, suicidal behavior, because you then have a hard time connecting with others, which then led to a whole other era of dysfunction when it came to me trying to get into romantic relationships with women. But now becoming a dad, it was like one of those things where those thoughts came back of, you can't be like your father. And then it was like, well, am I? And how do I be this way? I don't know if I've gotten off topic there, but
no,
you saying that really, it was a moment, and it was one of those things where I felt like it was the first time I had ever really owned up to any sort of self-worth that I didn't know was there.
I think it's really important for everybody, for every kid, boy or girl, to find something to put that into, right? Like, martial arts makes a lot of sense because you can sort of simulate in a safe, controlled environment, like where to put a lot of those feelings and have that instinct come out in very competitive, like in a safe manner, right? For some people, it's exactly. I mean, no, 100%.
I'm reading this right. No one listening is going to see that, but I'm reading Bruce Lee's daughter's book about her father's fight philosophy.
It's funny you mentioned that, because the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, which was the book that Bruce wrote, was instrumental to my journey. And like, I was lucky in the sense that because I was bullied as well. I'm the youngest of 4 boys. I was like physically weak, like just thin, skinny fat. no muscle. And my brother,
fat.
skinny fat's a term for like the mesoendomorphic build, which is like thin arms, thin legs, but a little bit of a chubby belly.
Oh,
it's a thing. And that was me. That was, I didn't have the athletic inclination that my father, who was like a high school football star and a track star, and my brother, who was, just ridiculous genetics, just carved from stone. I never had that. So for me, I was a big nerd who played a lot of tabletop gaming. And I found this one tabletop game called Ninjas. I can't even say it without laughing. Ninjas and Super Spies. That was basically the different character classes were different martial arts. And like reading that, I was like, oh shit, there's more than just karate and taekwondo. And I found a martial art that made it like sound like, wow, I didn't have to be big and strong to be good at this. And I happened to find a school nearby, and training in that allowed me to slowly build my confidence and own that instinct I think you're talking about, Aaron. And so for Rory, for you, like what was there a moment in your life? What was like that access point for you that had you going from like being a kid that was maybe, skinny, not athletic, maybe not good at stuff? What was the thing that like helped you grow and helped you evolve into kind of like what you are now? If there was one thing.
Well, I had friends, who were on the football team my senior year in high school. And to get on the football team, you had to run a mile in your shoulder pads in 6 minutes, I think, and 30 seconds or something. And at the beginning of summer, before my senior year, I tried to run a mile just to run it. And I could on the track, and I ran in like 8:45 or something. And, I was just out of shape. I had never done anything athletic before. And someone I was friendly with through like AV club in high school, he was on the football team and had graduated, and he ran with me like almost every day he met me. So I saw myself kind of physically improving. And the first day of football in August, I remember I said to myself, I'm just going to stay on this guy in front of me, his tail, and just follow him the whole way. Because he told me he could do it. And I was like, as long as I stay with this dude, I'm going to make it. And I remember so vividly on the very fourth lap of the mile, him just like kind of taking off like the Flash and leaving me in his dust, and me just running as fast as I could, chasing after him. But anyway, I made it. I made the mile. And so I saw that I could set a goal without being athletic. I could run a mile in 6:30, and I'm not a runner. And I think that's where, Aaron, you might not be into fighting or that kind of thing, but I think it's good for every male to exercise. I really do. I think a healthy body does lead to a healthy mind, and whatever it is, whether it's weight training or running or yoga, but having some sort of goal and achieving it, I think is important. And I think you can take that into other aspects of your life. So I continued running, and then I got into boxing too. I started a boxing club in college, and then I trained for the Tough Man out of college.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I just kind of stayed with it and tried different forms of athletics. And, Aaron, you mentioned your dad and not wanting to kind of associate yourself with that kind of violence. And in my experience in dealing with a lot of UFC fighters, I found that the deadliest people in the world are also the kindest people in the world. That you should never mistake kindness with weakness.
Yeah.
And the best people I've met are fun. They like to laugh. They like to joke. They're kind. They're completely unassuming. They avoid fighting at all costs. And these are some of the baddest motherfuckers on the planet. And they don't have to prove it to anyone.
Yeah.
They just are. So I just think, I wouldn't, I know you have some, things from your past with your dad and everything, but I think, for everybody, having something to do with fitness is a good thing.
I will say this about that, and that's the other sort of watershed moment in my life, that actually, if I did not go through this thing, I wouldn't be the guy I am today. I went through a very bad breakup with a person that Eddie knows, I'm not going to mention names.
Did you date Eddie's wife, Aaron?
No.
Yes. All the drama of that is behind me. But
I want to interject really quick because there's a fun thing here. Just like Aaron said, like he and I have discovered that we know all these same people. It's become a really ridiculous running joke in the last 15 years is that like I'll be on a friend's Facebook page and I'll see Aaron comment. I'm like, Jesus Christ, how many people does Aaron know? And then like when Aaron finally met my wife last year at Comic-Con, she came down. We were at I think it was the National Geographic party, I think.
Yes.
And like his wife is a dancer, my wife's a dancer, like they both teach dance, like they both like the similarities with our wives is a little eerie. Like it's kind of crazy how it's sort of kismet how this whole thing happened.
Right. So I mentioned briefly before about how all of that stuff, messaging that I got as a kid led to this separation anxiety and this lack of confidence, but this need to try to find connection and not really know how to be in a positive romantic relationship with a woman because I had no example of that. And I had all of this stuff in my head that I didn't even know I had in my head. And it took this really dysfunctional relationship I was in after a cavalcade of dysfunctional relationships to finally realize that I had been blaming every girl I had dated for being crazy and not really taking any of the responsibility myself, thinking I was also a part of it. And I recognized there was a pattern there. I decided at this very low point in my life that I needed to change it. I got into therapy. And one of the things the therapist said is I needed to start getting exercise. So I went through a completely big diet overhaul. I started eating better. I learned how to cook. I now cook. I'm a pretty good cook. I'm not going to, toot my own horn or anything, but, and I started going to the gym. And when I started going to the gym at the very beginning, I had no idea what the fuck I was doing. And I was so self-conscious that I thought people were staring at me every time I went. And at one point, I don't even remember what day it was or what was going on in my head, but something snapped in me where I just was like, I don't fucking care anymore. I need to get better. And it became I'm not going to say it was like going to the Iron Paradise like The Rock has, but it became a kind of a religious thing for me where I had to do it every day. Yeah. It was my outlet. At that time, I was in extreme debt and I lost my job and SAG went on strike. My agent passed away. It all happened in like a year. And I ended up moving back into my mom's house. I was in my early 30s. So that was weighing on my self-esteem. And it was just, I had to put the blinders on and do what I had control over. And what I had control over was pursuing, going to movies and getting the entertainment outlets that bring me joy and exercising. And suddenly I packed on like 40 pounds of muscle and, I would be at the gym like twice a day. I'm not that way anymore, but for a while there, it was like suddenly it was profound to me how that changes you internally and externally. My brain, it felt like my brain changed. It felt like my perspective on life changed. And that was one of the things that the therapist said to do. Cause he pretty much said when I went in, he's like, well, you've made it this far without trying to kill yourself. So I'm not going to put you on drugs. And then he suggested change of diet. And because I don't sleep well at night and I have a lack of energy, I went on certain herbal supplements, B12 and 5-HTP to help balance out my serotonin levels before going to bed. And then I would just work out every day. And it was just insane to me how that was so simplistic. Those things changed my life and set me on this path where my cousin, he says to this day, he's older than me. He was like, you were dealt a really bad hand growing up. And I'm surprised at the man you became. And I told him, I'm like, if it wasn't for the therapy and, really focusing on doing those things and going to the gym, I would have never thought that I would be that guy. It changed everything.
Well, you bring up to me, a classic dad trope is, how do you not repeat the sins of your father? And I think it's probably something that a lot of guys struggle with. I didn't grow up in what I would consider an idyllic household, a lot of abuse. And I saw myself repeating some of the patterns with my first son, for instance, like spanking out of anger, and I saw myself kind of becoming my father. And it was not what I wanted to do, I made a conscious decision. I think when my son turned 8, that I just can't keep doing. This isn't the right. I didn't like the way I felt, of how I was acting, and so I stopped. But therapy was very important for me in that, going to therapy. But also, you mentioned exercise, and I think one reason why I like it is because it's the one area of your life that you can control. And there's so much, especially now, what's going on in the world, where you have no control. If I told you, hey, what's life going to look like in January 2021, none of us can have any clue what it's going to look like. It could be insane, but you can control if you work out the next day, and that's what I like about it. And I like the serotonin release that it gives me. And it's not necessarily just about cosmetics, but I do believe that, when you feel good on the outside, you feel good on the inside too sometimes. And it does have that effect. And I'll say too, when I became a younger father, I have 2 boys. I've heard from different guys, wait until you have kids, man, you won't be going to the gym. But I think doing something's always better than doing nothing.
Right.
So even now during COVID, even if you can't go to the gym, if you can do anything, and I mean, like, if you could just do push-ups in the morning, and like that's your thing, like where you just do some sets of push-ups, that's still something. And you can still set goals, you can improve every day, and it'll still give you kind of a sense of worth and purpose. And I think it'll lead to other things. You'll start with push-ups and you'll start doing something else. And even if you just go on a jog every day, whatever it is of your thing, I think a lot of guys, you fall in the trap. If I can't go to the gym, I'm just not going to do it.
Right. Yeah.
That was sort of my experience. Is that it's funny you mentioned that, because like I got back into shape for my kids. I got back into shape. My father died when I was 27, and he kind of had a rough hand dealt. Like he did 2 tours in Vietnam. He was exposed to Agent Orange. He was part of the class. He was part of the class action lawsuit. He got a settlement based on his exposure. His service-related disability rating was like 248% or something like that. So like it did a number on him, and he should still be alive now, or at least like comfortably in his early 80s. He also was. The disabilities he had led to him being overweight, which led to heart disease, and which didn't do him any favors. So for me, it's like I have vivid memories of being 8 years old and like being rushed to the hospital where my dad was getting emergency triple bypass. You know what I mean? So like those memories are ingrained in me. And so when I look at my kids, and it's like when my oldest son Grayson hit 8, I was like, oh, I was your age when I didn't know if my dad was going to die or not. Like that to me was like, because I used to be a competitive athlete. I used to cut weight. I used to hit 149 at the dot for jiu-jitsu tournaments. I always considered myself in good shape. And as we know, is that if you let it slide, you still think of yourself as like that athlete. And then you get to the realization, it's like, oh God, 3 flights of stairs and I want to die. And then, so for me, there was a moment last year at my youngest son's 5th birthday, and my other son was 8. And I just looked at myself, I'm like, I hate this. Like, I hate how I feel. I hate how I look. I hate, I just hate this road I'm on. And I just, that combined with getting just the right, ADHD prescription, it allowed me to, it empowered me to get back into shape. I dropped like 36 pounds, and then I gained like 6 pounds lean muscle, and started getting back towards like something resembling for me. I noticed, and it's funny you mentioned the temper thing, Rory, because nobody who knows me, I think, would associate me with having anything resembling a temper. But when my kids don't do stuff, I find this pattern of like my father's temper coming out, and myself simply repeating it because it's the only thing I know. And for me, when I work out in the morning before they're up, it has to be in the morning because that puts me in a much better mood for the rest of the day, and I'm much less likely to repeat some of those ingrained patterns. I think all this is leading me to a question for you, which is like, how, we all have our own experiences or different experiences with our parenting. How conscious of those patterns are you? How like the good and the bad? How do you find yourself like recognizing things that your parents did that you want to, just like the Bruce Lee says, absorb what's useful, discard what's not? How do you take that approach to your own parenting, taking what worked for you and your parents and doing your best to leave the other stuff aside?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't really have a relationship with my parents right now.
No.
And I made that decision because I think as you get older, if you consider somebody like toxic in your life, and whether they're doing something other people recognize or not, certain people just have an effect on you. And I made a decision that I want to be the healthiest person I can be, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And I want to have a healthy household. That's really important to me, that my kids feel safe and that they aren't surrounded by drama. And I went through a high conflict divorce a couple of years ago, and that was really, really difficult for me because my whole thing was I did not want my kids to grow up like I grew up, which was in chaos. I felt like my childhood was very chaotic. I didn't know what I was walking into when I went home, and it didn't feel like a safe place, especially in the middle school and high school years. So I didn't want that. So I had this feeling almost like I had failed my kids. And, you talk to anybody that's been divorced, and it's one of the worst things you can go through in life. And, in some ways, I feel I've gone through deaths of people very close to me. I think it's worse than death. I really don't know many things that were worse that I've experienced. So post-divorce, I was so conscious of giving my kids as healthy of an environment as I could. So what does that mean? It means like, when I'm dating, I'm not going to bring girls around them, that they're going to get my full attention. And, my current, I'm engaged. I have a fiance.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. It was very important that she was healthy and that we have a healthy relationship. That was my number one marker, and that she was mature and could provide kindness to my kids and a healthy environment. And, Aaron, you had mentioned, you said, oh, you're struggling with the masculinity of fatherhood and then, I think this was before we went on the air, Eddie, you were saying you didn't know how hard to drop the hammer down on your son for not doing an assignment. And, the truth is all that stuff is pretty subjective. You'll talk to one person, they'll say, oh man, you gotta be on your kids 24/7. You'll talk to someone else and they'll say, man, you just gotta let your kids make their own mistakes and they'll learn on their own. You don't want to be a hard ass. And part of the benefit of my job that I have being a director and producer is I get to meet really interesting people and successful people. And one of the people I met and got to work with was Archie Manning. And this is a guy who has produced, 3 very successful adult children, Peyton, Eli, and then the third son, Cooper Manning, which to me was the most impressive one because he's the Manning you don't hear as much about. And you would think if there was anyone that could be kind of the dark cloud of the family, the black sheep, it would be Cooper. And it's just the opposite. He's very well adjusted. And when I was working on the film, I really tried to study, what did this guy do? And I think there's just a couple of universal truths to being a father, and everything else is kind of up for grabs. It's very subjective. It's what you want to do. But at the end of the day, you give your kids attention. That's a big one. You you make sure you spend time with them and that you're present when you spend time with them, that you're not on your phone or you're not thinking about work, that you're actually into what they're doing. And another one's affection. What adult says, man, my dad just hugged me too much. It was so annoying growing up. All he ever did was tell me he loved me. No adult says that ever. It's always the opposite. I never knew if my dad loved me. He never told me, blah, blah, blah. So I think that, and then the third one is just affirmation, which I never really received as a kid, meaning that like your parents respect you and they don't have to agree with you. But they recognize that you're your own person. You have your own opinions and that you matter. And everything else, whether you want to be hard on your kid with homework or whether you want to enroll your kid in sports or not sports, I don't really think that stuff matters that much, But Archie Manning, to me, he did those three things really, really well. And that, it's if you're a sports fan, Archie Manning was the quarterback in New Orleans. He was a big star back in the 70s. And what really struck me is that someone told me he was never the center of family life. His kids were always the center of family life. They weren't like Archie's kids. He was always Peyton, Eli, and Cooper's dad. Right. And that really struck me, that, he really cared about them and what they thought and what they did. And, they all, I think, the proof's in the pudding. They've all turned out, at least from all, appearances, pretty successful.
Yeah. You mentioned, sorry, Eddie.
Oh, you're good.
You mentioned a few things there that I felt compelled to touch on. First off, growing up in kind of a chaotic environment and having that in mind, that you do not want your children to experience what you went through. The other night, my daughter was running around, it was after dinner, and she kept coming up and giving us a hug, and it hit me. She was 2 years old. When I was 2 years old, the environment I was growing up in was not loving, and I was not in a situation or a position to express joy like this girl was just expressing. And it was like a punch to the gut, where I like, not only was I realized, or just not realizing, but recollecting a moment from my childhood, I was superimposing that to what my daughter was currently experiencing and realizing she's already living a better existence or a better upbringing than what I was handed. And then the second thing, I am still struggling with this. I have a hard time telling my mother I love her. And I don't really know why. I've struggled with this since my late teenage years. And I said, the doctor said I hadn't tried to hurt myself. I did try to kill myself when I was 17 and it didn't work. And then a month later, I booked VR Troopers, my first big acting job. I went from having a knife to my wrist to playing a nerd on the popular children's show that was a spinoff of Power Rangers in 1994. It was a weird transition, but knowing that I grew up in this trauma and seeing how my grandmother would constantly put the blame on my mother for things. And then I would start to realize that I was, or not realize, but it would go through my head that I'm this wimpy kid because of you. And so I started projecting that onto my mom and pulling away from her. And I think that's when that started. And it just became like this defense mechanism where it's now I'm working on it. But it's one of those things where I never thought it was a big deal until, I don't know, the past decade, where I'm like, I need to be able to tell my mother that she's my fucking mother. I say that to my daughter and my wife all the time. And my mom was here the other day and she commented on how great I am with my daughter. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? She's like, you're just so patient with her. And I remember growing up in an environment where patience was not an option on the table. And when my grandmother started going downhill and I had to take her to doctors and stuff, I think that was what trained my brain to be patient in really difficult situations. watching my grandmother die before me, who was basically my other parent, I think sort of exercise that patience muscle that I never knew existed. And so I think that's a big part of it, patience and being there in the moment. And yeah, when I mentioned the masculinity thing earlier, growing up, I always thought that a man is this, a man is that. You know what I mean? Like the 80s, it was Rambo and Rocky Balboa and Hulk Hogan and all this stuff. And now I just that concept I believe has changed. And when I said what I said about going to the gym and feeling like I was being stared at, it was because I felt like I was pretending to be something I wasn't, because that was never an option or just a thing I even saw myself doing, going to the gym and working out. That's only what meathead muscleheads do. And I think it was in that moment that it started dawning on me that I was putting myself in a box that was, after years of being bullied and called specific names and categorized as such, that I realized that, masculinity and the idea of being a man and being a responsible father and all of that, that's not something you can fit into just one box.
Yeah, I think 100%. And, I mentioned getting to work with different people, and I'm so appreciative of my job and I feel so grateful for it. But for mostly because I get to meet so many different kinds of people from different walks of life. And I think, right now we're so divided as a country. And it's almost like, if you're in this political party, you don't talk to this person, and you're this and you're that. And I find most people, unless they're like sociopaths or whatever, most people are pretty much the same. We're all the same.
Yeah.
And people want to love and they want to be loved, and they've had different experiences. And I think, social media separates us a lot. But I think when you meet people in person, they're pretty similar. And, when you talked about, you didn't want to fall into being a meathead or whatever, and categorize yourself as that. I mean, I get it. And I think
No, it was more so I didn't think I could be that because of the years of conditioning of being put into this one place. I thought I was being an imposter, going into the gym.
Yeah. And I think it's easy, but I think like literally every single person alive should be working out. It doesn't matter what your background. And, it's easy. Like I herniated a disc like 2 years ago and it just aggravated again. And like, especially as you get over 40, it's so easy to kind of say like, that's it. My working out days are over. I'm hurt. And I'm like, oh, fuck that, man. Like I'll go swim. Yeah. I'll do whatever I can do because I need that endorphin, that serotonin to me. So you tell me what I can do and I'll do it. If it's, I did yoga. I went to yoga classes, whatever it was to kind of, to get that out. And, you mentioned too, just changing the topic a little bit about your mom and saying, I love you to your mom. And I don't want to get too heavy here, but it's, if you can forgive your parents, and it's not easy, like I don't talk to my parents, but I've forgiven them. And I've done that because I just didn't want to carry around that weight with me, I'll tell you, when I was 7, I was molested, not by a family member, but by a neighbor. And, I harbored that for a long time. And my mother said that never happened. I made it up. And then she said, but then she prefaced it, well, if it did happen, you were really young. Like, well, normally you're not molested when you're 25, but I tried to understand where she was coming from. And I think almost it looked at like it was an attack on her parenting, that she would let something like that happen under her watch. And I think if you really dug down, it hurt her deeply that would happen to her child, and saw it almost like she wasn't doing her job as a parent, protecting her. So I tried to understand that. At the same time, I recognize I don't necessarily want that in my life, that kind of total invalidation of your feelings or your experiences of what happened, like I'm telling you as an adult, this happened. It happened. I lived it as a child. You weren't there. I'm telling you, this is what happened. So I felt like for me to be a better father, I had to kind of separate from my own family I had growing up. And I think it did make me a better father. I wasn't carrying around as much anger or resentment. And it's a hard thing to do. But, you know, if you have a relationship with your mom and if you can forgive her, you know, and believe me, it's a lot easier said than done. And it doesn't necessarily mean basically, you say, I forgive you, Mom. But if you can just kind of see,
right.
You know, I've heard your story of, you know, you had this crazy dad who was a biker and drug. If you could see it from her perspective, if she's trying to protect you, and she's not necessarily doing it the right way, you know, but maybe it'll free you a little bit.
I'm basically her only family, so I see her very regularly, and I've been helping her declutter her place. And that's also been a part of this whole trip because we've been digging up like stuff she's put in boxes like 30, 40 years ago. You know, I'm finding wedding albums of her and my dad and shit that I've never seen. It sort of brings things full circle. And it's sorry, Eddie, I'll just say this one more thing.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I have constantly been struggling with, in that I need to just stop comparing my mom today to who my mom was when I was little, and stop expecting her to be someone she isn't.
Yeah.
And that's a daily challenge.
So going in reverse order, I hear you there. Cause like my mom was like my hero, growing up. My mom was in the military as well. If you do a Google image search for, Newsweek, February 1980, you'll see my mom on the cover in her uniform holding an M16 with full camo face paint, because they're doing an article on like women in the military. She was like my idol. And, you know, since my dad died, I've been very protective of her. But Rory, like you're saying, a toxic presence. And, you know, I still have a relationship with my mom. She does not make it easy a lot of the times. We're still trying to reconcile that. She's not in great health. So I'm reconciling all those feelings. More importantly, Rory, I want to thank you for talking about that. I think that's incredibly brave to talk about. I think men and survivors of abuse, we need to normalize experiences like that and talking about that and getting that out in the open. But it also like reminds me of like something that, you know, my wife and I talk a lot about. I have 2 boys and a daughter. My daughter's 18 months. My boys are 9 and 6. We talk a lot in this house about consent, and a lot of the discussions I have with my sons are around consent. If I see my son, my younger son beating up my older son, we have discussions of consent. Like, you don't get to do that to his body. Your body is yours. Nobody else, not me, not your mom, not nobody gets to put hands on it. And likewise, you don't get to put hands on anyone else because you're angry or because of a feeling. I do my best to use language like, hey, can I give you a hug? Can I give you a kiss? As opposed to like, give me a kiss. You know what I mean? Like, give me a hug. Like, I'm very affectionate with my sons, but I always try to code it in ways that they understand. How, as a father to boys, like, what have your experiences been with talking about consent and protection of the body?
It's so funny. It's so funny you bring that up, Eddie, because my sons go to overnight camp, which is like a child molester heaven. You know, I mean, overnight camp, it's like you're there with kids all summer. I'm like, this was my nightmare, thinking about what could happen. And my youngest son went at 7 years old. So they were 7 and 10 when they first went to overnight camp. And I wanted to drill it into them about, I was very paranoid that, they could get sexually abused at camp. And I was like, I was trying to get them excited for the experience. I was like, oh man, summer camp's going to be awesome. You guys are going to have a great time. And no matter what happens, we're not going to let anyone touch our pee-pees, no matter what. And they're like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, yeah.
You're like the Tony Robbins of body safety.
Yeah.
selling it to you.
And I was like, it's weird because you would think a child molester would be this mean, scary guy, but they're not. They act like they're your friend, like your cool uncle or your camp counselor. And then they'll tell you weird things, like if you say something, we'll murder your parents. but we're not going to get murdered. And no matter what happens, you never let anyone touch your pee-pee. I just kept saying this for like months. And when I dropped my kids off, I was saying goodbye to them, to my youngest son. And I said, hey, and remember, no matter what, and what I was going to say is, your dad loves you. And he goes, I know, I'm not going to let anyone touch my pee-pee. So I was like, all right, cool. I did my job. He knows he's not going to let anyone touch his pee. But, you know, dude, that is really difficult. I think you bring up a really good point, because as parents, you want to protect your kids from any harm, any problem, anything. But the truth is, if you think about it, everyone goes through shit. Everyone has something they go through. And our kids are going to have stuff that they go through. And they're going to have things that they have to deal with in life. And through pain, you grow. You really only grow through pain and struggle. So the question is, are you helping your kids when that pain comes? Because it's going to come at some point, you know, whether it's a breakup or, you know, whether they're rejected through something or they get fired, whatever it is. It could be minor or it could be something major, the death of someone close to them. Are you preparing them for how to deal with adversity? And that's the struggle, I think, as fathers, because you can't stop them from dealing with pain. It's going to happen.
Right.
It's like we know they're going to go through some shit. We just don't want them to go through the shit we went through.
Yeah, you know, I'm not going to go into detail because honestly, I don't have a lot of memory of it, but something similar happened to me when I was about 10. And I can see I did some questionable things in my teenage years because of what I believe what happened to me started a certain destructive behavior. And when I learned I was going to be a dad, one of the first thoughts through my head was, oh my God, am I going to abuse my kid? Like that seriously was, because you hear all about that. Usually the abusers were abused. And that had me up at night. I was losing so much sleep about this, because not only did I already have in my head, my dad was this garbage person and don't be like him. Then this thing happened to me, and it wasn't a family member. And I've actually never talked about this except to my wife. So this is fun. It was, do you remember the Big Brothers Association?
Mm-hmm.
It
Big
was
Brothers Sisters. Yeah.
It was a guy from that. And it was, I only have bits and pieces of the memory of what happened, but like, I actually think about him, and I think about that very regularly, especially now that I'm a parent. I'm not necessarily sure if I have a question here. I'm more so.
I have a question. I have a question for you. Why you seem like you've had a lot of, you know, like you said earlier, you weren't dealt the best hand, but yet you seem like you've turned out pretty well. You're introspective. You're married. You have a daughter. You have a career. Why would you say that you turned out pretty well adjusted for the most part? You probably say, "Oh, I'm not that well adjusted," but I think you seem like you have your shit together.
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing this with you if you didn't have your shit together, dude.
I learned how to bullshit very early in life, and that was something one of my teachers told me. They gave me an A on a test, and they asked me if I knew what I was talking about. I said I honestly have no idea. I was just rewriting the question in like 3-paragraph answer. And they said, and there were, and it was at that point where I was like, okay, so like I feel like I you know, I'm a thoughtful person. I understand how things work, and I know how to communicate. But I think I used that for a good portion of my early to late teenage years to hide what was happening in my life. And I was masking certain behavior. I did some illegal stuff. I became addicted to shoplifting from about the age of 14 until 17.
That's not uncommon.
I stole.
How did you go from your parents' basement though in your early 30s to being married with a daughter.
Oh, you know, I feel like it's what I already talked about. I had to come to grips with the fact that it starts with me. I was deflecting and blaming everyone else for my problems. I was blaming every girl in every failed relationship for my depression and for my frantic behavior, for the financial issues I was dealing with. I was blaming my mother because of the ways or the ways in which she did and the ways in which she did not deal with the trauma of my grandfather's death, of my grandmother's accident, of being in this relationship with my dad, and then parenting me through all of that. And instead of really instilling boundaries in me, buying me gifts when I felt bad, when I felt down, instead of teaching me, she would just buy me stuff to make me feel better. And so I grew up in this like idea of that's how you feel better is you buy stuff. And that translated into some really destructive behavior. But all the while, I was pretty smart. You know, I graduated valedictorian in my senior class, but I never used those skills to the best of what they could have been because I didn't believe in myself. And because I grew up with knowing where the ceiling was, I always believed that this is the best it's going to be, that I'm never going to be able to get above this limitation of where our life has been the entire time growing up with my mother in very low income, food stamps, all that. I never believed I could rise above that until I went into therapy and took charge of how I was living my life. And it was that moment where I also decided I needed to create boundaries and set rules of how I can relate to other people. If you're going to be my friend, or if I'm going to be in a romantic relationship with you or whatever, you can only go so far with me. I never had that because I never knew that was a thing. I would always bend over backwards for everyone because I would always equate my self-worth with the people around me, never realizing that even if they're super toxic, it was better than being alone. That was always my thought process. So when I went into therapy and started working out and started dealing with everything that was piling up inside, you know, all of my issues, that was an empowering moment for me that shifted my entire life and my entire perspective. And that was when I started, you know, knowing that these are my limitations and these are my rules. And if you take advantage, you know, you're done. Yeah. And that changed everything. Well, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's really, I was thinking, hearing you talk about it, I could tell you a little bit of a story. I think it's a pretty cool story about, for me in my life. And it kind of ties into my career a little bit. You know, growing up, like I told you, I always kind of just felt like I just did not fit into life. That's the best way I could describe it. Not fit into like middle school with the jocks or fit in with I'm talking about in life, I felt like I didn't fit in. That I was always kind of, you know, for various reasons. Until I saw this show called Beverly Hills 90210. And I saw this character in, I think I was in the 8th grade, Dylan McKay.
Yeah.
And I'm watching this dude and he's cool. He rides a motorcycle. He's got all the chicks. They're fighting over him. Brenda, Kelly, they all want him. And he always has the coolest thing to say at the right time. But he also has demons and tragedy in his life. And he's always struggling to kind of do the right thing and be a good person. And the character has a lot of heart. You know, I don't know if you ever watched the show.
Oh, yeah, of course. I was in the 9th grade. That was the one show everyone talked about.
And there was a lot of depth to his character. It was a very well written character, and it was very well acted. And I pretended like, you know, to watch the show. I'll watch 90210 like with my friends that were girls in high school. You know, yeah, we'll watch this and party at 5. But secretly, I really related to this character because had a heart of gold, but he was really cool. And, I really admired him. Well, and I was devastated when he left the show. I was a freshman in college, and this was like, a friend of mine dying. And granted, I didn't know that the actor Luke Perry. Well, fast forward 10 years after that, I'm in my early 30s. I have a project going on, and I decide, you know what? I should see if I could get Luke Perry to narrate this. This is a guy I admired when I was younger. This would be a bucket list. And so lo and behold, it was a World War II project. He narrated it, and I met him. He was awesome, and it went really well. And I thought, that was a great experience. Well, about 9 months after that, I'm doing a project for ESPN, and the person at the network says, hey, we could really use a narrator who was really big in like the early 90s, like pop culture wise. And I say, well, what about Luke Perry? I just worked with this guy last year, and he was awesome. He's got a cool voice. And they're like, yeah, Luke Perry would be great. So they're like, go ahead, Rory, get Luke Perry. So I saw him again. We worked together, and he's like, hey man, I have an idea for a project, a documentary. I don't know, would you be interested in working together? I'm like, definitely. Didn't matter what it was. So we exchanged numbers, and then at Aaron and Eddie, a friendship blossomed. Me and Luke Perry going back. Well, maybe, I guess we met in 2010.
Yeah.
And we started working together. We did a short film together on Marge Schott, the Cincinnati Reds owner.
Yeah.
And I spent time with Luke at his house. And I got to actually know the guy, Luke Perry, not Dylan McKay. And I remember one time he asked if I wanted to hang out with him. The first time we were going to hang out non-work wise. And I said, yes, definitely. And he invited me over his house, and I'm like, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to go out in Hollywood, Luke Perry. We're going to paint the town. It's going to be great. And at 4:45 in the afternoon on a Friday, he came downstairs in his old man pajamas, with old man glasses on. And he's like, I'm like, what's going on? He's like, well, can we just hang out here and drink beers? And I was like, yeah, I guess. And he's like, well, I'll let you ask me any question you want about 90210. So anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but we struck up a real genuine friendship, and we started hanging out. And every time I was in LA, we'd see each other, and we just really hit it off. And it turns out the guy, Luke Perry, was much cooler than Dylan McKay as a real person.
Yeah.
And then when I got my divorce, the friendship went to the next level because he went through a bad divorce.
Yeah.
And he wound up doing a deposition for me about as a father. He wound up inviting my kids over to his house. He appeared on my son's YouTube show. And we really hit it off as fathers more than anything, because he had a son and daughter, and he had been through this, and he always prioritized them. And he saw that I prioritized my kids. And we hit it off, kind of like the three of us are hitting it off, talking about it. And we would just talk about our kids. And this guy would check in on me from the set of Riverdale. He would call me. Wow. And I would hear people in the background, and he'd be like, how are your kids? What's going on? So fast forward a couple more years. He said, I'm divorced. He said, I want to introduce you to somebody. I used to date her a couple of years ago, but she moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. I think you guys would really hit it off. And I was like, I'm down. If you like her, that would be cool. So for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I texted her. She didn't hit me back, and we never connected. Well, I'm sure as you know, Luke passed away from a stroke.
Yeah.
About 2 years ago, and it was horrible, very shocking. And I'm about to go to his memorial, and I get a text from this girl, and she says, hey, Luke mentioned you many times, and I'm in Charlotte, and I was wondering if you'd want to get together and talk about him at all. And that was Michelle. And I said, yeah. And I said, are you going to his memorial in LA? And she said, yeah. So I was like, you want to go together? So we wound up riding together to his memorial, and we've been together ever since.
Oh,
that's
man.
my current fiance.
Wow.
But I bring that up because Luke and I love talking about being a dad. And he was one of the best dads that I've seen. And he went through kind of a bad divorce. And he was very concerned about, the impact on his kids and everything. But his son is a professional wrestler in this organization, AEW.
Really?
Jungle Boy.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
He's got
Jungle Boy, he's amazing.
Abs.
He's so good.
Yeah. So, and his daughter, they speak so lovingly of him.
Yeah.
And I guess, and Luke didn't have the easiest childhood. And I learned a lot from him, but I learned again that, there's no perfect handbook to being a father. And we would talk about this all the time. And he would just stress to me, just be there for your kids, be there, give them affection, and you look at his son now, he's not living in his father's shadow. He's blazed his own trail. He's doing his own thing. He's not Luke Perry's son. He's Jungle Boy. He's his own thing. So, my friend Luke really, he helped get me through that rough period in my childhood. And at the same time, I think he really made me a better father. So I would say to you guys, don't stress out about the small stuff so much. Do what's in your wheelhouse that you feel is the right thing. And I think if you just stick to those couple of things where you're showing your kids attention and affection and affirmation, everything else will fall.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. And we're going to be wrapping up the show in a minute because I didn't realize how long we've been going. But I mean, they've
all gone so long because the conversations are so good. It's crazy.
It was just like 2 days ago, we're getting my daughter ready for bedtime. And I was talking to my wife about just the economy and being without a steady job and finances and being able to take care of our kid and how we're going to get a house and what's going on in the news. And she stopped me and she was like, we can only control what we can control right now. This is what is important in this room. And I realized I was like worrying about everything else. And there was a time and place for that, but that wasn't it. And it's in those moments that I have to bring myself back and be like, you just got to be present and mindful of being present. And that's all I think that's all we can really do. And that's the one thing that drives everything else. Well, loving your kid. And then, that's what drives everything else. I have one more question for you, Rory.
Sure.
How do we get Snoop Dogg on the show?
Shoot your shot, man.
Well, not through me. That's
I love your honesty. I had to say it. You've done 2 projects with the guy.
I actually have one quick question.
Oh,
4
wow.
projects.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Because you did a couple seasons of it. Because so Rory, you and I met years ago when I just kind of cold DM'd you and asked you to be on my documentary panel at Comic-Con. I do this documentary filmmaker panel at Comic-Con every year. And I was a big fan of I Hate Christian Laettner and a lot of your earlier work and stuff. And I knew you had other stuff coming out. And so because of that, I come from doc filmmaking originally. You get to meet a lot of people. You've interviewed a lot of folks. Has there ever been someone that you've interviewed or followed in your career that wasn't a dad that you thought, man, that dude would be a great dad?
That's a pretty good question. No, more so that this person shouldn't be a dad.
I'm hitting up IMDb right now.
Well, then.
No, I mean, usually maybe it's somebody that's younger.
Yeah.
But, like with Snoop, to me, the reason why we have a genuine friendship is there's trust.
Yeah.
And he knows that I'm not going to, if somebody wants to talk to me, I'll talk to them about anything. But if they want to talk to Snoop, I say, you got to go through Snoop because, I don't want to be that portal to him because he trusts me. And, the first series, we did 4 different series. But the first thing we did was called Snoop and Son, which was about him and his son for ESPN. And the reason why I think we hit it off so much is because Snoop was not getting paid for the show. Because his son was an amateur athlete and in high school. And if anyone got paid, it means his son would lose his athletic status to play in college. So all of his management, meaning Snoop, was completely removed from the show because no one was getting paid. So Snoop was doing this pretty much like this was the way that he could relate to his son, was through sports. And if you watch the show, it was one of the best experiences I've had in my career. You can see a lot of things that he does right and wrong, that he's kind of almost living vicariously through his son, through sports, but he doesn't know another way. And this is kind of an interesting story. And I think it's why maybe Snoop and I hit it off, is because he had never told his son he loved him.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I said, almost in a way, Snoop was like a 1950s father, if you can believe it, where it was kind of like, I provide for the family.
Right.
I'm not around, but I provide, and that's my job. You don't have to want for anything. And that was probably more than his father had done for him. His father, Eddie, actually fought in Vietnam, Snoop's father. And
I did know that.
Yeah, he reconnected with him later in life.
Yeah.
So I said to Snoop, well, you got to tell your son you love him on camera. Yeah. And I think he said, I'm not doing that pussy shit. And I was like, well, you're going to do it because it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And I kept pushing him. I'm like, you got to do it. You got to do it. And he did. And he was so happy that he did that. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, I'm really glad you pushed me to do that. I think he called it soft ass shit, but I'm really glad you to push me to do it because, and I think he looked at that series as a way like to kind of reconnect with his family and kind of be a more present father, because through shoots, he was being a dad. So he had to show up and he had to do stuff. And so that was a really cool experience and kind of, I think we formed a real genuine bond there, him working on that show. And then we did some other things, and he was a really a great guy. I loved working with him.
Yeah, man.
Learned a lot from him. And I think, he has a pretty good relationship with his son now.
Well, that would be a great lead into my introductory email to his publicist.
I was going to say, we've learned a lot from you, Rory. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, man. Really, really, really enjoyed the chat. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, man. We were talking about this before we started recording, but it's those uncomfortable, just like the uncomfortable situations that you grow from that we were talking about physically. It's these uncomfortable conversations that I think are necessary to have.
Yes.
That may not be the easiest things to talk about.
Aaron, you mentioned Ric Flair,
Yeah.
And the hardest, look, you meet Ric Flair, especially, even now, what's he known? He's known for the jet flying, limousine riding. I mean, fun. He's fun. He's what everything you love about wrestling, this vicarious lifestyle of, just he lived it. And it's so cool. And when you're around him, you want to talk about it. The thing you don't want to talk about with him that feels uncomfortable is when he found his son dead in a hotel, drug overdose. So I had to ask him about that for the documentary. And that was pretty uncomfortable. And he has a lot of regrets about that. And again, it goes back to he wasn't around. He was not around, for his son. And I think, not to end on a downer here, but that, that was an uncomfortable topic to talk about, but I thought it was a poignant moment in the 30 for 30 where he talks about his son's death.
Right.
And I think that, unlike Archie Manning, Ric Flair made Ric Flair the center of the universe, and Archie Manning made his kids the center of the universe. And I think, you don't have to be a superstar or a wrestler to do that. We all think of what we do is really important. And I think as dads, if we can just keep the focus on our kids and what they're interested in, and, everything else will work itself out. Don't be anxious about the economy, Aaron. Everything's going to be fine. You just, I have a question. Are you, your daughter's 2?
Yeah.
Are you getting laid again now, finally? Usually after 2.
Wow. I'm doing fine. Thanks for asking. I would just like to say this is the dad word spiral. There are no real downers on the dad word spiral.
Very
We're
true.
already on a dad word trajectory. Rory,
Hey.
this has been quite a great, insightful conversation. I'm curious if you can tease or tell us if you have anything in the works and where people might be able to find you online if you want people to find you online.
Sure. Well, I'm still doing stuff with the UFC, and I actually I'm getting more into the scripted world. So I have a couple scripted projects in the works, but nothing that's coming out immediately. My website is rorykarpf.com. Last name is spelled Karpf. And I would encourage everyone to check out the Twitter of my dog.
I was going to say, your dog came in and visited when you left the room earlier when we had to pause.
Well, I run my dog's Twitter account, and it's one of my joys of Twitter, because I find like more and more I'm hating Twitter with such a passion.
Oh, tell me about it.
There's such negativity. And the thing is, if you can sift through all that negativity, you make really good connections on there. You can find some cool people. And there are some really fun accounts. And I think my dog's account, Dozer the dog, I believe it's Dozer_dog is his account. He tells you about his daily tribulations of being a dog. So I've been working a lot on that.
Nice. Yes, I have seen some of the posts and I found it endearing and fun. And I've always wanted a dog. I've always wanted a bulldog. So he came in and said hello, and I appreciate that. Rory, thank you so much for this amazing episode. This we're at that time, Eddie. We're at the end of another episode of the Dadward Spiral, and everyone who has stuck with us throughout this over hour-long episode, thank you for listening to my voice. I mean, Eddie has a nice voice, Rory has a nice voice, but like this thing, like pivots
you got
between
personality for days, buddy.
Pivots between
I would just say though, keep doing what you're doing, because I think it's important. Keep talking about the stuff you're talking about. It's very, the biggest downfall of podcasts that I find is they don't last. You lose momentum. You might do 10 episodes, 15, and it starts to trail. Keep going, because you're never going to give up on your wealth of knowledge of dad stuff. And I think you talking about the stuff that you talk about, your childhood, your family, that's important stuff, and I think it's brave that you put yourself out there like you do and talk about things that are important, like getting therapy or being intimidated going to the gym or worrying if you're going to repeat your mom's mistakes or whatever it is. These are all things that people need to talk about,
Yeah. Well, thank you. That means a lot. So yeah, this is the end of episode number 4. Wow. It's been a month, Eddie. We started this a month ago.
It seems like we started yesterday, but also like we've been working on this for a while too. So time has no meaning when you're a dad in the Dadward Spiral.
Time is a flat circle. Once again, I'm Aaron Pruner. That's Aaron Flux on Twitter, Aaron W. Pruner on Facebook and Instagram.
And I'm Eddie Doty. You can follow me at Kirby.matrix at Twitter and Instagram, and at ZeroDork30 at Twitch.
And if you want to follow Dadward Spiral on social media, I created a Facebook page. There is a website, if you want to go to dadwardspiral.com. Look, I'm a freelancing stay-at-home dad. It's hard for me to keep everything updated. So that website is kind of in limbo currently. But the Dadward Spiral Twitter account and Dadward Spiral on Facebook, as well as dragonwagonradio.com. That's where our show is located. And I almost forgot, we have merchandise.
We do. That's right.
Anyone at all is interested in buying a shirt with an image of me falling in a spiral inside of a silhouette of my daughter, but that artwork is out there.
There it is.
It's pretty cool. My best friend from preschool, who is still my best friend, who is a graphic designer, created the logo and artwork, and I would highly recommend it to go check it out. And if it's so, if you decide you need a new shirt, or a mask for COVID, or a coffee mug that may advertise this show, Eddie and I would be appreciative of that. That'd be nice. But I'm not pressuring you.
I am.
Okay. Go to go to dragonwagonradio.com. Click on shop. You'll find the merchandise for all the other shows on the network, including ours. Give it a look-see. Again, thanks to Rory Karpf for joining us. I'm very aware of how I pronounce your last name, Rory. I am super appreciative for you all going with us on this ride, and please stay tuned because we have a lot more cool guests lined up for the coming months. This should be interesting. Until then, be excellent to each other.
Hey, this is Zen Zenith just sneaking in to say check out the House Show with Zen Zenith. That's me on Dragon Wagon Radio. The House Show is a live concert series featuring stripped-down performances and interviews with amazing singer-songwriters. We do the whole thing in front of a real live audience at a real live house and package the whole thing up into a podcast for you to experience in the ease of your home or car. Real intimate performances, real intimate conversations with great people. Check it out at thehouseshowshow.com or on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever else good podcasts are found. We'll see you there.
It's Dragon Wagon.